Rude restaurant staff kept overlooking a little deaf girl. What their waitress did next left everyone speechless. The night Michael Turner walked into Maison Elite with his daughter, he wasn't looking for a miracle. He was just looking for one quiet dinner without the world reminding him how hard everything had become. Michael was the kind of man people rarely noticed twice. Tired eyes, a jacket that had seen a few too many long days, the kind of quiet exhaustion that comes from doing everything alone. He ran a small logistics company he built up from a single truck and a lot of stubbornness. It wasn't an empire. It was just enough to keep the lights on and put his daughter through school. Since his wife passed, it had been him and Grace against the world, and most nights that felt like plenty. But not tonight. None of the ordinary struggles mattered when his 7-year-old daughter Grace pressed her small hands against the restaurant window and looked up at him with those big blue eyes, waiting for him to make the world feel safe. Grace had been deaf since birth, and tonight she was already overwhelmed. Maison Elite was the city's most exclusive dining room. Floor-to-ceiling windows, white tablecloths so crisp they looked ironed by hand, and a clientele that wore money like a second skin. Michael had saved for weeks to bring her here for her birthday. He called ahead and specifically mentioned Grace's condition, asking for a quieter section. They seated him near the kitchen anyway. From the moment they sat down, Grace felt the vibrations, the clatter of plates, the rolling carts, the constant motion. She couldn't hear it, but she felt it. Her little hands balled into fists on her lap. Her eyes darted around the room. Michael watched her the way only a parent watches a child they cannot fully protect, with love wrapped tightly around helplessness. The other diners noticed Grace almost immediately. A couple 2 tables away exchanged glances when she knocked over her water glass, not from carelessness, but because she hadn't seen the server reaching past her. A woman in pearls visibly flinched when Grace let out a sharp, involuntary sound, the kind deaf children sometimes make without realizing it. An older gentleman near the window simply stared. Nobody said anything kind. They didn't have to. Their faces said it all. Michael straightened his collar, signaled for a new glass of water, and quietly signed to Grace. "You're doing great, baby." She signed back. "Can we go home?" He felt that in his chest like a punch. He signed, "Let's eat first." That's when their waitress appeared. Her name tag read Nora. She was in her late 20s, dark hair pulled into a neat bun, green uniform pressed and professional. She had the quiet efficiency of someone who had worked hard for every shift, table by table. Nora approached with 2 menus and immediately noticed Grace. Not with the polite, awkward glance Michael had grown used to, the one people gave when they didn't know whether to stare or look away. Nora noticed Grace the way you notice someone you recognize, even if you've never met. She crouched down to Grace's eye level, and then she did something that stopped Michael cold. She signed, not perfectly. Her fingers moved with the slight hesitation of someone self-taught, but clearly, warmly, unmistakably. "Hi, my name is Nora. What's yours?" Grace's entire face changed. Her shoulders dropped, her fists unclenched. She looked at this stranger, this woman in a green uniform in a room full of people who had made her feel invisible, and she signed back with the biggest smile Michael had seen from her in months. "Grace." Nora smiled like Grace had just given her a gift. "That's a beautiful name," she signed slowly, making sure Grace could follow. "Are you hungry, Grace? I know the best thing on the menu." Grace turned to her father, practically bouncing in her seat. Michael Turner, a man who had spent years holding everything together without asking anyone for help, had to look at the ceiling for a moment to collect himself. What followed was the most extraordinary, ordinary dinner Michael had ever experienced. Nora didn't treat Grace like a problem to be managed. She brought Grace a small notepad and a pen so they could also write back and forth. She described each dish with her hands, exaggerating the motions playfully until Grace giggled. That pure, unfiltered laugh that deaf children have, the kind that fills a room with something the hearing world sometimes forgets it's missing. When Grace pointed at the breadbasket and then at the olives and made a face, Nora laughed and signed, "I don't like them either." "Don't tell the chef." Grace covered her mouth with both hands, delighted by the shared secret. The other diners, the ones who had stared, who had flinched, who had exchanged loaded glances, began to watch again. But something had shifted. The woman in pearls wasn't watching with irritation anymore. She was watching with something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. The couple who had exchanged glances now looked at each other differently, quieter, more reflective. A little girl who had been made to feel like a disruption was now the most captivating person in the room. Not because anything about Grace had changed, but because one person had chosen to see her. Halfway through the meal, the restaurant manager approached the table. Michael had spent enough years reading people on job sites to know a rehearsed apology when he saw one. The manager, polished, apologetic before he'd even opened his mouth, leaned down and spoke quietly. "Mr. Turner, I want to sincerely apologize for the seating. We had a miscommunication with your reservation. I understand you requested a quieter section." He paused. "I also want to say, Nora is one of our finest servers, and tonight has reminded all of us of something important." Michael looked at him steadily. "Nora didn't remind you of anything. She just treated my daughter like a person." The manager nodded slowly. He deserved that. Before they left, Michael asked Nora a single question. How do you know sign language? Nora smiled, and for the first time that evening, something in her expression shifted, a softness underneath the professionalism. My younger brother is deaf, she said simply. I learned because I didn't want him to ever feel like he had to explain himself to me. Michael was quiet for a moment. How long have you been working here? 3 years. Are you happy here? Nora hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, kind of pause that says everything. I'm grateful for the work, she said carefully. Michael reached into his jacket. He placed his business card on the table, a simple one, just his name and a direct number. My company isn't huge, he said, but we run routes across a few states, and I've been trying for months to build a real accessibility program for our drivers and clients. I just haven't found the right person to lead it. He paused. I don't think I've been looking in the right places. Nora looked at the card for a long moment. I don't have a business degree, she said. Neither did I, Michael replied. Grace tugged her father's sleeve. She signed. Can we come back? Michael looked at Nora, then at his daughter, then at the room full of people who had watched a 7-year-old girl teach them something they should have already known. Yeah, baby, he signed back. We can come back. 3 months later, Nora stood in front of a room of Michael's employees at the company's small annual gathering. She wasn't waiting tables. She was leading a workshop on building inclusive environments for employees and customers with disabilities. She was nervous. She was extraordinary. And in the front row, Grace sat next to her father, watching with wide eyes, not because she understood every word, but because the woman at the front of the room looked like someone who had always belonged there and had simply been waiting for the world to see it. Some people spend their whole lives being overlooked, and sometimes all it takes is one person who chooses to look. If this story moved you, hit subscribe to USA Enlightened Stories for more stories like this one, and let us know in the comments, do you believe kindness always finds its way back?